Alright, so the PS Vita has now been around for a mighty long time, and over the years, quite frankly, it hasn't received the love it should have gotten from Sony. It came into this world as the successor to its older brother, the Sony PSP, or the PlayStation Portable back in 2012, which in contrast to the PS Vita, was a hit, selling 80 million units worldwide as opposed to the PS Vita's laughable 15 million. So what went wrong? How come the long-awaited successor to the PSP didn't succeed? And is it worth buying today? Well, if those are two questions that have been keeping you up at night for a while, then you came to the right place, because that's exactly what I'll be answering in this video. You can thank me later. So for a minute, let's just dive back into the history. So like I said, this little thingamabob here was a long-awaited sequel to one of the most beloved handheld consoles of all time, basically guaranteeing at the very least some partial success. But Sony still managed to muck it up pretty badly. How? Well, a multitude of factors made the hype around this handheld die down insanely quickly. At launch, the PS Vita retailed for €250, pounds and dollars for the base model, which may sound fair at first glance. I mean, the PSP was the exact same price at launch, and the retail price of a Nintendo Switch, which is often regarded as one of the greatest handhelds of all time, was only 50 quid more. So what was the big issue? You see, what didn't go down well with the Vita was the price of the proprietary memory cards these things needed in order to download, play, and save your favorite games. For just a measly 8GB of storage space, you are looking at a $45 price tag, and for 32GB, which is nothing to marvel at, would still set you back $120 US. Now, just to give you some perspective, a 32GB microSD card can cost you as little as €6 or even less. And that's not even considering the fact that most people tend to just have these lying around the house anyway. Like I said, these were proprietary memory cards, so you couldn't just look for a reasonably priced SD card and have a good time. But things have changed, and I'll get into that a bit later. So for a base model PS Vita and 32GB of storage, you were looking at forking over €370 dollars or pounds. And that's not even accounting for any games. So understandably, nobody wanted to take out a mortgage to pay for a handheld console and a couple of games, especially when the next generation of consoles were coming up on the horizon and were likely to cost a similar price. That leads on to another problem: the games. Although the library of games today is not bad by any means, again we'll get into this a bit later, during the PS Vita's lifespan there was definitely a gap in the market when it came to AAA games or even cut down versions of said games. And that market, to this day, has never been filled. But how come? It's said that making AAA games for the PS Vita was insanely difficult. I mean, they weren't working with particularly powerful hardware. This thing came packed with a 4-core ARM Cortex-A9 CPU, half a gig of RAM, and the GPU was an SGX543MP4+. Rolls right off the tongue. And that had a monstrous 128 megs of VRAM. So when it came to weighing how many people actually used the Vita and how much time, effort, and money had to be put into making games for it, the economics just didn't make sense, and studios would much rather just save themselves the trouble and not make the games at all. Now, that all sounds pretty bad, right? But what if I told you today the PS Vita is a much more compelling buy compared to what it was more than a decade ago at launch? Let's just have a look at it from the outside firstly though. The PS Vita to me has always been a good looking console. From the front at least. Okay, the back's not that bad. I mean guys, it's heavily based on the PSP, it's gonna look good. On the front we have the beautiful 5-inch 960x544 OLED touchscreen. That's right, even though more of a gimmick really, Sony was really dead set on introducing a lot of touch features for the PS Vita, including that touch panel on the back. Which, come on, let's be honest guys, should really have been some L, R, 2 and 3 buttons instead. While we're looking at the back though, there's also a camera. Cool. We of course also have the trademark arrows and shape buttons, but a game changer here was that legendary right joystick. Not only is it, you know, a right joystick, which lets you, for example, control the camera in games, which is a crucial mechanism nowadays, there's also just something aesthetically pleasing about having that second joystick. I don't know, it just brings that balance the PSP was missing. Moving down to the bottom, we have the proprietary charger, since this is the original OLED PS Vita, and something we sadly don't see all that much of nowadays, the 3.5mm headphone jack. RIP. But what won't be missed is this sin right here, the proprietary memory card slot, which if you are in possession of eyes, you may have seen that I have nothing in there. Strange, right? Considering I did say you need it to store and play games. On the top, we have the power buttons and volume buttons, which are pretty tactile, and the positioning is also pretty convenient. This slot right here, which, if I'm honest, I have no clue what it does, but I'm glad it's there. And last but certainly not least, we have the game card slot. Now, I don't actually have any game cards I can show you, but I do own this funny little thing called an SD2 Vita, which is quite literally this console's saving grace. What the SD2 Vita basically does is it gives you all the space you'll ever need on a PS Vita to load up all your favorite games at a reasonable cost. By that I mean you buy an SD2 Vita and use any micro SD card you have lying around the house. Now, what you'll ideally want for this is jailbreaking your Vita, which then allows you to play all your favorite games at a much more convenient price, if you catch my drift. Now, if you're afraid of jailbreaking your console and potentially being on the wrong side of the law because the police will bust down your door and arrest your loved ones, you're right. I'm currently situated in a private safe house here in Zimbabwe after fleeing my home country all because I couldn't stop jailbreaking my PS Vita and playing games in exchange for, let's just say, minimal currency. Or none at all. Look, in all seriousness, nothing's gonna happen. You're fine, I'd like to think I'm safe, and this may or may not be the 100 millionth console I've jailbroken to date. By the way, I'm not actually in a Zimbabwean safe house. If you didn't pick up on it, it was a joke. There's nothing illegal about installing custom firmware. What is illegal, on the other hand, is piracy. And what I'm not telling you to do is go out there and start pirating PS Vita games. All I am saying is you can. And this makes it way easier and much more convenient, which of course I advise you not to do. Wink wink. Now if you like, I will have links to an SD2 Vita adapter in the description, but just know that these are Amazon referral links, so if you do buy one using my link, I get a little something and it doesn't cost you a cent more. So if you do want to show some support and you're in the market for an SD2 Vita, be sure to use one of the links below. Now, when turning on this specific Vita, you're greeted with a lot of funny homebrew applications, games I found on an unspecified app store, and of course this really cool Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse theme. It runs perfectly and plays games about as great as you'd expect it to. Even with the slightly more limited PS Vita game library, there's still a crap ton of quality games to play. And with the power of custom firmware, this PS Vita also becomes the perfect retro game emulator. There's an app on here called Adrenaline, which essentially turns your PS Vita into a PSP, and you can quite literally play any PSP game out there, like Surf's Up. You know, man, I don't know why I liked that game when I was smaller, but I really did. It was pretty ass, but I loved it. Also, there's an application called RetroArch, which I don't currently have installed, but that lets you emulate a ton of retro consoles. So now the Vita is not only a PS Vita with its own selection of games, but it also doubles as a PSP and a retro game emulator. So if you really are wondering whether the PS Vita, a handheld console once regarded as a failure, is worth buying in 2024, well, the answer is 100% yes. Depending on the price, of course. I paid €130 for this one here in Ireland, fully jailbroken, and it came with the SD2 Vita too. But the custom firmware was in Japanese, and sadly I can't read Japanese, so I had to re-jailbreak it myself. Which was definitely a bit more tricky than jailbreaking a PS4, for example, but it was worth it. There's countless guys online that'll help you, and I'd say that if you set aside just an afternoon, you'll be fine. Now, if you do find something in that price range in your area, I'd say go for it. What I would say though is ideally just don't pay anything above 150 quid. Unless it comes with something special on the side, you really don't need to be overspending on a 13-year-old console. But I do hope this video answered some of the questions you may have had on your mind. And if you did enjoy it, do consider liking and subscribing. With all that being said, I hope you do have a great night, and I'll see you next time.